Over the last month, I've built about a dozen voice AI automations in Lindy, from customer support and sales development to booking golf and making appointments. In this video, I'll show you Lindy in action while talking through the pros and cons in 5 different areas. I'll also show you a couple of features that are kind of insane, only came out last week and no one is really talking about. And then towards the end of the video, I'll explain how it compares against some of the alternatives like NAN, Relevance AI, Zapier, and who it's good for. First though, let's talk about setup. So getting started with Lindy is really straightforward. Once you've gone through the sign up form on their website, you'll land on a page like this. Now, I'm really glad I'm doing this video this week and not last, because in the last few days, there's been a huge update to Lindy and there's a few huge features, but one of the most helpful ones is this ability now to have agents build your agent workflows for you. So you can just say, build a LinkedIn outreach automation that takes a row from a Google Sheet and messages each prospect on LinkedIn. Hit go and it's going to go ahead and build out that agent workflow. Now it's probably going to come back and ask me some questions, confirm what I want, ask me I need to connect LinkedIn and all that. But in principle, we can go here and we can see that the Lindy agent is actually building this for us. So this is huge from a simplicity perspective, because previously we could use a template, and the templates in Lindy are really good. We're going to look at those in just a second. But this makes it even easier because it means you can build workflows that are precisely what you're trying to achieve with Lindy without needing to spend, half an hour, an hour understanding what actions to use, how to connect them together. Not that any of that stuff is hard, but this is just going to save you even more time. So you can see down here, this agent builder has come back. It's asking me a few questions. I could go ahead and we can sort of have that back and forward and build that. I'm not going to do that today, but you can get a bit of a sense of how simple that is. So let's talk about templates, because the templates are still genuinely really good. I think Lindy get this balance right of making their templates genuinely quite useful, still very simple. A lot of platforms, the templates are a bit sort of token, but I find the Lindy ones, I do still use them quite a lot. So let's take a common use case. Let's build a phone support line. You may know this already, but the real kind of standout feature for Lindy is its ability to make and receive calls. A lot of other platforms do this, but Lindy have kind of made it really intuitive and very good. Has a few issues, I'll talk about some of those later. So here you go, you can kind of get a bit of a sense of how the platform looks and how it works here. So it's very, very visual, very easy to understand. Obviously all no code, so you don't need to kind of worry about it's not like NAN where you have to kind of mess around with JSON and get kind of in the weeds with code. All really simple, all drag and drop. If you want to add actions, you can just click on any of the lines. You can add actions, knowledge base, all this stuff. All of these things will become pretty intuitive and all kind of make sense quite quickly as you start using Lindy. The first time, using any platform, some of these things can be a little bit overwhelming, but I think in general, compared to other automation platforms, Lindy is one of the best at making it very simple to achieve some pretty complex process automation. So a quick example, we can click here, we can perform an action, we can have a look at some of the integrations, some of the actions that we have available. So let's say, I don't know, WhatsApp, send a WhatsApp message. What's another good one? Lindy's got some kind of homegrown tools that are really, really helpful as well. So things like the phone, obviously, you can do web scraping, you can talk to other agents, so you could build lots of modular agents and have them kind of work together. I'm going to touch on Lindy Computer later because that's a massive one. But in general, that's kind of you can see in terms of getting up and running on Lindy, it's very quick, it's very easy, and once you're in, you've got templates and the agent builder, making it really straightforward to get up and running. So next, we're going to talk about one of the most important things if you're using Lindy for particularly voice AI, which is the quality of the voice. So if you're planning to use voice AI in Lindy, it's pretty crucial that those features are going to work well for you and you're not going to run into any major issues. So we're just going to talk about a few interesting things around voice AI. First though, I'm going to show you this in action. So this is a customer support line that I recently created for a sausage company. Long story, but I'm just going to show you, play you an example of how the voice AI in Lindy sounds.
It's the smoked cheddar and chipotle sausage. It has a smoky flavor with a bit of a kick from the chipotle combined with the creamy cheddar.
So there's a few things that are notable there. It sounds very natural. I think if you were on the phone with that person, you wouldn't necessarily assume that you were talking to an AI. It's an American accent. Now, obviously, if you're based in the US, this is not an issue at all. Lindy does have a bit of a US bias. This comes through in a few places. For example, the phone numbers that you can receive and make calls from in Lindy can only be currently US numbers, +1 numbers. As I say, not an issue if you're based in the States, but if I were creating a customer support line here in the UK, it could be a little bit unusual if I've got a +1 number and an American accent on the support line. So that's a bit of an unusual thing. A lot of the other platforms give you more options. Now, Lindy does allow you to change the accent and have more options, but you have to be on a much higher tier. And we'll talk about pricing and how it relates to voice AI in a bit more detail in a moment, but it's worth knowing up front just in case that is going to be any kind of issue. A few other things just to touch on around voice AI. So a bit of an unusual quirk is that you do need to, when you're doing this, you need to ensure that you instruct your voice AI how to have a phone conversation. I say unusual because it feels to me like this is something that the Lindy product team could kind of do in the background. But if you don't tell Lindy how the mechanics of a phone call, like don't talk out loud on a call, you're going to get something like this.
Tool code print default API, knowledge base, search knowledge base, query X, customer reviews of different sausage flavors.
Another funny quirk is that the model makes a huge difference on the latency. Now this is an issue, and this is something you see across all voice AI tools. It's not unique to Lindy, but choosing a model like Gemini Flash is going to reduce latency. GPT-4 Turbo also works really well. But if you have something like Claude 4 Sonnet, which takes much longer to reason and process, you're going to have these massive delays on the phone and it comes across like this.
Which sausage would you recommend next?
So there's a few quirks, but once you know those things, once you sort of put them in place, it just becomes part of your process and it's not a major issue. But in general, the voice AI functionality in Lindy is really solid. It's very usable, particularly if you're using it for things like sales, customer support, but also just general appointment scheduling. It works really well. So with that, let's touch on pricing. So Lindy essentially starts at $49.99 a month. This free tier is really a 7-day free trial, so you can sign up to Lindy, pop a card in, not get charged for a week. It's good because it means you can kind of have a poke around, make sure it's got the right integrations, you're happy building things in Lindy, and can see that you can create the thing that you want to build first in Lindy. But if you're planning to use Lindy to actually have running automation workflows here, you're going to need to be on this plan or above. Now, a few things worth pointing out here. The first one being that on the free plan, you can't use the voice AI functionality. So the first thing you want to build is like a phone support line or a AI SDR. You will very likely need to upgrade to this plan earlier anyway. So I would go into the mindset with Lindy that this is how much it costs. And if you start using it heavily, it's going to increase a little bit, but that's kind of the cost you're going to pay. A few other things worth noting. Firstly is that on this plan, you get 30 calls a month from Lindy Phone. So if you need more than that, you're going to need to be on a higher plan. And as we saw earlier, if you need the advanced voice AI functionality like changing accents, you're going to be need to be on this plan, which is obviously quite a bit more expensive. So definitely worth factoring that in. The final cost that is worth considering, it's a pretty minor one, but you may have seen earlier, if you're using the Lindy Phone action to make or receive calls, you're going to need to pay for a number. Now this is kind of fair enough because Lindy's going to have to be paying for that number, so they're just passing that on. But you can see here that you can just, I've paid for this number, but you can just scroll down here and purchase any number for $10 a month. So worth factoring that into the amount that you're going to pay. Now we'll do a bit more of a deeper comparison between how Lindy compares against some of the alternatives. At a pricing level, it is definitely not the cheapest. If you're on a budget and you want to kind of build automation workflows on a budget, there are cheaper tools out there. Zapier, Make are all going to be way, way cheaper, but you're going to have less functionality. And for me, I think this comes largely down to the voice AI. So if that is the feature that you want, Lindy is, as far as I'm concerned, the fastest, most powerful, easiest tool for building those kind of automations. So customer support, sales development, etc. Now, as I say, we'll cover that in a bit more detail later, but for me, I think their pricing is very much justified. It's a really, really good tool. And I think, frankly, they could be charging more than this and it would still very much be justified. So it's not the cheapest, but I think pretty reasonable, the amount that they're charging. Particularly considering some of the features that they've released in the last week or so that make Lindy even more powerful. The main one that I think is really impressive is the Lindy Computer. So in this next section, we'll jump over to features, talk about some of the different actions, different integrations that we've got in Lindy, and I'll show you how some of those work. So we've covered how to get started in Lindy and some of the big features like Lindy Phone. Now I thought what we'd do is walk through actually building an agent workflow in Lindy, and I want to highlight a few particular kind of big features. So integrations, we'll look at agents, we'll look at computers, which is one of the new features, and we'll also look at knowledge bases. So to start, I'm going to use the kind of agent builder. I'm just going to give it a task to build an AI agent that monitors my inbox using a dummy inbox for now and draft replies to inbound emails. Should adopt my tone and writing style. So I'm just going to let that build in the background. Okay, so it just came back with a few questions. I've given it some answers and now it's going ahead and building the agent. So it's come back and made a first attempt at building this workflow. This is obviously a very, very simple workflow it's come back with. It's essentially just saying when an email is received, look at some tone guidelines, draft reply. We can make this much, much better, and I'll talk through some of the changes I make as we go. But at a simple level, you can kind of see how that's working. So the first thing that it wants me to do is to configure the knowledge base. So essentially give it some examples of my writing so it can write good replies. So we've got a few options here. We can upload files, we can give it text, we can let it scrape a website, which is really, really good because then it can kind of be reinforcing. It can sort of constantly learn as new information's added, or we could give it access to Google Drive, Notion, etc. Probably the better option here would be to do something different where we connect it to the sent section of my inbox so it can constantly monitor my emails. But for this case, I'm just going to keep it nice and simple. I'm just going to copy a load of text in here just so it gets something that it can work with and it can see how I write emails. So I'm going to get that syncing and let that do its thing. Now, a few features that I want to touch on. Firstly is integrations. So if you click any step here, you can see we've got this option to perform an action, and this allows us to add integrations to other tools. This really comes into its own when we add an agent, which is what we're going to do next. But I want to first show you some of the integrations that we've got. I'll drop a link in the description below to the latest integration page so you can see and get a kind of an up-to-date view of what integrations Lindy offers. But just to kind of give you a bit of an idea in situ, you can see some of the options here. There's absolutely tons, and there's more that you kind of you can see here by kind of going through all of them. There's also, we've got options like web scraping, which is really powerful, and Lindy has its kind of own utilities, things like adding a web browser, Lindy Phone we talked about, Lindy Mail, Lindy Meeting Recorder. So we've got tons of options that we can work with and add in there. Let's add an agent into this, because I think what we want is we want an agent to do a bit of processing to understand what kind of reply is going to make the most sense, and then have the agent reference the knowledge base and then write reply. This is a little bit kind of too simple. So I'm going to add an agent step here. And if I were building this kind of for production, I would like spend some time writing a really good prompt. But for simplicity, I'm just going to say you are an email assistant who writes thoughtful replies to messages that arrive in my inbox. Now that's obviously way too broad to be particularly useful, but for this case, it will be fine. Now, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to give this agent access to a computer. So I mentioned this a few times in this video. This is a new feature, it only came out last week, and from how I've used it so far, it's pretty insane. Now, the way to think about this is it is basically just like giving your agent access to a computer. So let me get rid, or actually, okay, yeah, we'll leave that like that. Let's do a bit of tidy. So now that agent can basically do anything that you could do with a computer. You could have it go and access websites. So let's say, for example, let's move this one out. I'll get rid of that step and we'll just tell this one, you're an email assistant who writes thoughtful replies to messages that arrive in my inbox. Use the computer to do any necessary research to improve the quality of the replies. Again, I've not put too much thought into specifically how this works, but basically what this now means is this agent can fire up a computer and go and do its own research as it kind of feels is useful. Okay, so I'm just gonna go and tweak some of the prompts behind this, and then we'll give it a test and see how it does. So I'm just gonna go into the step where we draft the email reply, and what I want to do is give it the information that our computer went and gave to the agent. So I'm just going to add a section here and just say use any useful context from the computer output. Let's do that. Because our computer may have gone and the agent may have used the computer to go and get some information that may be useful for the reply. Again, this is kind of a bit of a silly example. I'm not really expecting this to be fantastic, but just to kind of show that in the example. So we get an email, we fire up a computer, the agent is then told that it can use that computer, do some searches, get some information, and then pass that to the next step. Something also worth kind of mentioning here on the agent flow is that we can give our agent access to different skills. So we can see here by default, because we've got the computer here, it's got the ability to use the computer in a few different ways. It can use terminal, it can use browser, URLs, etc. We can also give it the ability to do other things like, I don't know, add rows to Google Sheets, anything that we can do with the integrations as actions, our agent can also go and do those. So this is kind of where the world is your oyster in terms of what you can do with agents, because providing you can write the prompt and tell the agent clearly what it is you want it to do, it can essentially do anything, anything here. So skills, really, really important. So it gets the information, makes a decision, does some Googling, goes and has a look at the tone guidelines, and then it drafts a reply, which we've given it this prompt here. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and give this a test. I've just picked an email for it to test on, which is very meta. It's the announcement email about Lindy 3. So it's got the email, it's now firing up our computer. We can see it's setting up the browser. And what it should now do is make a decision as to whether to use that computer to go ahead and do some Googling. I think in this case, it will probably decide not to. Oh no, it is. So it's going and doing some searching. So this is kind of cool. You can watch it actually go ahead and make the searches. Okay, so it's happy with the information it's found. It actually went to the Lindy website, read the blog post about Lindy 3. So now it's exiting the agent step, looking at the knowledge base to understand tone, and now it's drafting an email for us. So this will be interesting what it comes back with. So let's see what it's done. tempted to send this to the Lindy team. Hi there, thanks for sharing the Lindy 3 announcement. This looks like a significant step forward. Brilliant. Okay, well that is absolutely not my tone, but I think that's my fault for giving it about 4 emails to base my entire tone on. So this is a bit of a silly example. Obviously I could do a lot of things to improve this, but you get the gist of a couple of really crucial features here. We've got the computer, we've got the agents using a knowledge base, and we looked at some of the different integrations and actions that you can use. Now, in the next section, I want to touch on very briefly, quite an important area before we look at a comparison between all the different similar tools, which is looking at scalability and some of the kind of security and infrastructure things around this. So we'll dive into that now. Given that one of the main benefits of using Lindy is the ability to automate and scale up phone calls, it's pretty important that we consider security, because if sensitive information is shared over phone calls and you've got hundreds of customers having conversations with your Lindy phone every day, we want to make sure that that information is secure and treated properly. Now, thankfully, Lindy is very much on top of this. It's the biggest vote of confidence for me is actually the HIPAA compliance. This is really, really difficult to get, and it means that Lindy is able to work with medical information. Now, I know from having done some work with CRMs in the past that getting that certification means quite a lot. SOC 2 compliance, again, these are impressive, but frankly, they're kind of table stakes if you're running a software company. But this one means that they are very much on top of it. All this stuff is stuff that is good and I would like to see. It's good they're very proactive on things like penetration testing. But all this to say that, obviously you can't guarantee against security incidents, but it seems to me from this information that Lindy is doing a lot to stay on top of this. Again, from a scalability perspective, this is going to come down somewhat to pricing. Particularly on the phone call side of things, we touched on earlier that you can only have 30 phone calls a month on the lower plan. However, when you go up to the business plan, you do get unlimited phone calls. So if that is the main kind of vector of scaling with Lindy, it seems like providing you're on the higher price plan, that should be fine. So with that said, let's jump into a little comparison and we'll see how Lindy compares against some of the other tools and who Lindy is likely a good fit for. Now, Lindy is essentially a workflow automation that happens to do a really good job of voice AI. So it gets compared to both camps. It gets compared to voice AI tools. It also gets compared to workflow automation tools. So I'll touch a little bit on both those camps. If you're looking for a tool that does voice AI really well, you're going to be comparing Lindy against maybe 7, 8 other tools. I'll probably do a video on this at some point where I'll test each of these individually. But at a very high level, Lindy does voice AI very, very well, as we've seen. But there are tools that do certain things better. For example, if you are looking for a tool that has the highest quality voice automation, has low latency, and the ability to clone your own voice, you're probably going to want to look at something like an ElevenLabs. If you have a kind of enterprise scenario where you need massive scale, Lindy's likely going to work out not super cost effective, so something like an Air AI might work better. And if you want to kind of work with Twilio, code up your own thing, something like NAN is going to be better. But generally speaking, it's a really, really solid option. And I really like Lindy because it's not a kind of one-trick pony. I can use Lindy to automate my YouTube channel, general kind of day-to-day little business automations. I can also use it to automate personal things, and I can do the voice stuff as well. So it's kind of, for me, replaced Zapier. Zapier is a workflow automation tool you're probably familiar with that is very linear. It's like when this trigger happens, do this and then that. I like linear because we can create these kind of more multifaceted workflows that are a bit more complex and have agents sitting within them. So you can do a lot more with Lindy than what you can do with Zapier. Compared to NAN at the other end of the spectrum, NAN is very, you can use it without technical chops, but generally speaking, something like NAN is better suited if you have more development expertise, you're kind of comfortable working with code within the workflow. So this is a really good tool, and you can build voice automation in it using Twilio. But it's a little bit overwhelming for people that don't have technical expertise. And the other one that I would I think is worth comparing is Relevance AI. I really like Relevance AI, but I do find that what would take me like half an hour in Lindy might take me half a day in Relevance. So for me, I think with some of the changes that Lindy have made, I'm struggling to find use cases where I would go back and use Relevance AI. So for me, it's a really good contender. In terms of who it's good for, I think basically mostly founders and CEOs and also kind of marketers as well would probably fall into this camp. Basically people who are comfortable with Zapier, but they want more out of it. But they don't, when they look at things like NAN, they get a bit overwhelmed. I think it's that middle bracket that people that fall within there, Lindy is a really good option for, because it's so simple to use, so intuitive, and yet there's so much power behind it. So you can do some really complex automation stuff that you would struggle to do in Zapier or Make. So I think if you fit that category, and generally that's going to mostly be founders of kind of startups and growing companies, where you have a lot of use cases that would benefit from automation, I think that's the sweet spot that Lindy falls in. All in all, Lindy's a really impressive tool, and with these new features, I'm using it more and more for complex automations as it's so quick and easy to do so. In fact, if you want to see me build a customer support line for that sausage company in about 4 minutes, you can check out this video where I do that. Otherwise, I hope that's been useful, and I'll see you in the next video.